Guys, a pleasure as always to be joined by the voice of the Lions, Fox 2 sports director, the great Dan Miller. Dan, how you doing, my friend? Thanks for the time, buddy.
What's up, fellas? How you doing?
Doing really good today. I want to start with this, Dan. This draft, and I know you had an opportunity to speak to Brad Holmes over the weekend. You know, what started out as kind of like a what's he doing on draft night quickly turned into man, this is a good draft. Is that kind of how you saw the 24-hour period from round one to the end of the draft, as they say?
Yeah, I definitely think Thursday night there was a lot of like, what are they doing? And just as you said, and some gasps and some, let me say this, okay? To me, the draft it can get a little irritating because everybody's an expert. And it's a little bit like if you have a couple talking points, you can become a Twitter scout. And all of a sudden, you know, your opinions are gold. That's just my take. Doesn't have to be yours. But yeah, no doubt. There were some people that there's some people that don't believe you should ever draft a running back in round one. And there's some people that don't look at you know, an off-ball linebacker as something that you should draft in round one. And you know what? If that works for them and their franchise, that's great. Talking to Brad Holmes, look, this is their board. This is the way they're going to go through the process. They're going to live with the results because you own the results. You drafted the players. And I think they're perfectly comfortable with that. They drafted guys for their window right now. They drafted guys that they believe will come in and help them right away. And, you know, we were talking about this the other day on the Sunday night show. And, you know, I hear people say, well, what about a second contract and this and that? Man, 4 to 5 years from now is an eternity in the National Football League. And this team is in their window, they believe, to win this division, get in the playoffs, see what they can make happen right now. So, look, I get some of the criticism because it might buck traditional values, but I think they're perfectly comfortable with the way that they did it, and I think they're perfectly comfortable if they have two players that can step in and make a big impact right away.
Dan, always a pleasure to talk to you. For those people that don't subscribe to the First Round Running Back Camp, well, talk about Ezekiel Elliott's rookie year, 13-3, over 2,000 yards per scrimmage. Last year, Saquon Barkley, what he did, and Christian McCaffrey and the 49ers. I mean, they didn't lose a game that he played in except the one without their quarterback, Brock Purdy. So you can tell those guys that. Let me ask you a question. Outside of Jahmyr Gibbs, who was the pick that really, really, really did it for you in this draft? What was the pick that you looked at and said, this pick I love?
Well, I think probably Branch, just because people didn't think that he was going to get there. And if I can throw out one other thing about the draft that kind of bugs me a little bit, and then I'll circle back.
I love it, Dan, because it bothers me too.
Maz's favorite phrase.
It bothers me
back,
too.
Here's
Everybody's
the thing,
an expert.
No, everybody's an expert, and here's the thing. And this isn't just about what the Lions did, but if they had drafted Brian Branch at 12 or 18, people would have been like, yes. And people would have been like, that's a great pick. So they take him at 45, and this isn't in any way shade at the young man, and I'll get back to him in a second, but they draft him at 45, and all of a sudden, it's a steal. All of a sudden, it's the best pick they've made, which to me ignores the fact that 44 times NFL general managers passed on him. So you'd have been happy at 18, but he fell to 45, and he didn't fall by accident. Everybody knew he was on the board.
Yeah.
And it's celebrated. You can't have it both ways. And that's where this thing kind of just makes your head spin a little bit. That said, look, he's a really exciting player who got knocked back by his testing at the combine and running a 4.58. But I think while speed is certainly a large component of what you do, so too are instincts, so too are the nastiness and the grit that he plays with, the way that he'll come up and hit you. I think they're really excited about what he can do for them. He might be a guy that there's not a spot for right away because of the help that they've brought in the secondary this year. But a couple of those guys are on one-year contracts, and C.J. Gardner-Johnson and Mosley as well. They're both one-year contracts, so he could slide right in next year. But I think he'll get some snaps. I think he's going to become a core special teams player right off the bat. I think he's intriguing to me. I tell you, Broderick Martin is a guy, if you look at him, not a complete product by any means, but a 338-pound man that's got some ability to move, and you don't find those very often. So I'm kind of thinking, okay, what can happen with him? Because it's a position of need for this football team. What can happen with him when you get him with this coaching staff, which has shown an ability to take young talent and develop it? So I'm excited to see him, but everybody's got a story. I mean, Hooker obviously is a guy that was probably trending towards being a top 5 pick in November, and now all of a sudden you're able to get him in the 3rd round. But obviously there's questions about, the knee coming out of a Tennessee system that's very different than most things that you'll see. So, I think there's a lot of guys in this draft that I see guys that I think will help right away, and I see guys that I'm intrigued to see what they can ultimately become.
You can let the cat sit on your lap, Dan. You
I
can...
know, she is just dying to come in there.
Give her a little FaceTime. Give her a little FaceTime.
We don't take ourselves that serious over here. You're more than
That is awesome.
I agree with you 100%. I love the Brian Branch. Oh, look at the cat. That's what I'm talking about. I love the cat as well, but I love the pick of Brian Branch as you do. And also, what do you think about this, Dan? You look at what the Texans stand to spend on their rookies. I think it's 109. I think the Seahawks are going to spend 90. The Detroit Lions got every player that they wanted for the most part, and they're spending $69 million. That's the stuff people don't talk about.
Yeah, and they moved around a lot, and I think Brad Holmes was able to do some things with the board to give themselves the ability to move up and get Branch, to trade back, get some value, and still get Gibbs, and then they picked up that pick early in the 2nd round. So I give credit to him, and I asked him, and I was serious, who in the heck keeps track of what picks you have and what picks you don't? Because Friday night, I couldn't keep track. It was crazy. It was just just trade after trade after trade. And I'd have been walking up there with a card. They'd have been like, dude, it's not your pick right now. You traded that. But it was, I think that, I give him credit for that and just being locked in on what they wanted to do. Look, I mean, fact is, guys, and Braylon, you know this better than anybody. We do not know, where this, I give up. We do not know where this draft is going to go or how these guys are ultimately going to be. And we're talking right now about being excited by potential. In the end, we'll judge it by reality and what these guys are able to produce. And like I said, Braylon, you've been there, you understand that, and you've seen hotshot rookies come in and probably looked at them on day one and gone, not going to make it. So we'll see what's going to happen with these guys. But I think they're very comfortable with what they did, and I'm excited to see. Look, Gibbs is a different talent, man. That is something that I'm excited to see what Ben Johnson can do with that. I think Campbell is a guy that I made the statement the other night on our show. I'll be shocked, and I'm just kind of shorting him 1 year as a rookie to not know how much he's going to play right away. I bet you this guy leads his team in tackles at least 2 out of the next 3 years. I think he's one of those guys that's just going to stack back there. And they need a little bit to be a little more stout back there. They were not good against the run last year, and he can give them some help at the 2nd level. So I think, it's fun to project what they might be. The real fun becomes when you figure out that they're who you think they are.
Hey, Dan, are you? I don't want to say if you're surprised that Swift got traded, but are you surprised that he got traded to what many people believe will be the Lions' chief competition, the Philadelphia Eagles?
I think probably Brad Holmes placed as many calls as he could, took as many calls as he could, and found the best offer. I think at the end of the day, you got to do what you can to maximize what you can get for him. And the problem is, with all due respect to DeAndre, look, the other teams saw the games that he's missed and the fact that, his availability has been a question, and that's a problem. I imagine if he would have gotten offered something better by somebody else, he would have made the trade. I think that's the best that he could do at that moment. So I'm not surprised he got traded, because I don't think with Gibbs coming in there was necessarily a role for him. And I don't think that DeAndre would have been happy with extremely limited snaps, coming into the season. And I think we all saw the writing on the wall that this was the final year of his contract. And based on what we had seen to this point, there was no reason to think that they were going to extend him.
Talking to Dan Miller, voice of the Lions, Fox 2 sports director. Dan, obviously you look at the draft and Hendon Hooker, you mentioned him a minute ago, 3rd round pick. A lot of people looking at that. The Lions finally drafted perhaps a future quarterback. Where do things stand right now? How do you see things playing out between Jared Goff and Hendon Hooker, or what any plan will be long term?
This is Jared Goff's job. And Jared Goff is going into this year as the quarterback of a team that's favored to win the NFC North. And I think where this goes from here will depend on how Jared Goff plays. Now, look, there's things that will happen around him that will not be his fault. But for what he can control, is Jared Goff the quarterback that we saw for the last 10 or so games last year, who was careful with the football, moved that offense up and down the field, top 5 offense in terms of scoring, and did great? Or is he the quarterback that we saw early in the season where the ball security was a question? And look, if Goff is the guy that we saw in Los Angeles for a couple of years with the Rams before things kind of went a little bit sideways there, or if Goff is the guy that we saw in the last half of last year when this team went 8-2 down the stretch, Hendon Hooker's not going to be the quarterback for the Detroit Lions. It will be Jared Goff, and we'll see what happens to Hendon Hooker, whether or not he becomes trade bait as a valuable piece or is the backup quarterback here. But in my mind, if Jared Goff is as good as he was at the end of last year in leading this team, playing football the way he did, they'll pay him, they'll keep him, and I think they want him to be the quarterback. I think they brought in Hooker, look, because that's great value at that point in the draft, and we don't know where this will go with Goff, but I think their intention is that Jared Goff is their quarterback. And I just think if this team is capable of doing and does do what we think they can, Goff's going to be the quarterback, and I think he'll be around here for a while. But the interesting thing is, look, he's 2 years left on a contract, so probably at the end of this year, it's a discussion that you have to have. I think his play and his production will dictate how those discussions go. But he goes in my mind, as the quarterback with the job to lose.
Dan, let's make some projections. Let's look ahead a little bit. You look at the Detroit Lions and how Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes have constructed this team. You look at what they've done in the draft and the offseason. Outside of the Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs, are there any teams that you're immediately worried about in the NFL based on what Brad Holmes has done with this team?
Yeah, I still think Buffalo is up there, and we're waiting for them to kind of take that next step. They're still really good offensively and defensively. Just in this division, we'll see what happens with Minnesota. I'm not projecting them as being completely out of it, as some people have. I mean, they still have an explosive running game. They still have maybe the best receiver, or certainly one of them in the league. Cousins can win games. They have problems defensively, but let's see how they attack those. I just think that San Francisco is still really good. I mean, look what they did last year with all the injuries that they had. So I think there's other teams out there that you absolutely have to look at. But I think what the Lions have done is put themselves in the conversation. But frankly, that's all they've done. I mean, the 8-2 finish was great. Would have been great to see them have a chance to get into the playoffs. But, now you're coming at this thing from a much different angle. You're coming at this thing as the favorite. And I'm not saying they surprised people last year, because once they started playing well, people knew what was coming. But I do think that there is a difference when you go in as the favorite and you kind of wear that and you understand those expectations versus when they came in last year with certainly that expectations of themselves, but there was not on the outside. Everything they're going to hear this year is about what they're expected to do. And if they get off to a great start, that thing builds. If they don't, I can start banging in your ears a little bit if you're not where people expected you to be. So I think they've put themselves in a great position. But as I say, that's really all they've done. Now you got to go out and earn it.
Great point, D. Mills.
Hey, Dan, just circle back with me for just a couple of quick questions.
It's his favorite
here.
phrase. And then we'll let you go, Dan.
Hey, Jared Goff. Jared Goff's a starter. Hendon Hooker's the rookie. Nate Sudfeld, they signed him. Who's the backup quarterback for the Detroit Lions?
It's a great question. Brad Holmes was asked at his press conference, are you still interested in signing a veteran backup? And Teddy Bridgewater is obviously the guy that's out there that they apparently made a bid for. I don't know if they're still actively doing that. Look, Hooker isn't expected to be cleared until, I think they said, and Brad Holmes won't even put a timeline on it, but some of the things that I read said maybe week 1 of the regular season. That's a little bit dicey to count on a rookie if you consider yourself a team that is going to win the division, expected to win the division. So the answer right now, I think, is Nate Sudfeld. But the question is, are they still in the market to bring in a veteran and somebody that they're looking to back up Goff in case something happens to him, because you could see this thing going in the wrong direction very quickly if you don't have a capable backup back there ready to step in and run this team. And I don't know, based on the timeline or lack thereof, that you can count on Hooker being that guy. And Sudfeld just hasn't proven that in the NFL.
Last one for me, Dan, is I got to go back to DeAndre Swift. Why not hold this guy over? It's his last year. When he leaves, you're going to get a comp pick anyway. Philly's going to get a compensatory pick if they don't re-sign him. We got to pick 2 years from now in the 4th round. We trade him to the best team in the NFC. Why not hold this guy as at least a backup to the guys that we have? What if someone gets injured? I mean, why not put Swift in? He only plays 50, 60% of the time anyway.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I don't know that DeAndre Swift had an interest in that. If you
It's
look
not
at the
his
reports,
choice.
his agents were. Yeah, I understand that, but also you have to consider the locker room, and you have to consider, if a player's going to be there that absolutely doesn't want to be there. And it seems like, based on the reports, very quickly, his representatives got on the phone with the Lions and said, "We want to be traded." That's what the reports basically said, and I think the Lions were probably moving in that direction anyway. Maz, I just don't know that they looked at Swift that was going to be a guy that was happy playing either no snaps a game and not in uniform, or playing 2 snaps a game, 3 snaps a game, or something like that. Look, they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs to put him on the field.
Yeah.
They didn't draft him to split time with anybody. They drafted him to be side by side with Montgomery, and I think play together a lot.
Yep.
And there just wasn't a role for Swift at that point. It's a fair question. I get it. I just don't know that they thought that was the best thing going forward for them or for Swift, in particular, understanding that it was the last year of his deal and they were in essence drafting his replacement.
I get mad because it just pisses me off. That's all. I don't want to give him away for
But
nothing.
Maz, if he
And
don't
listen,
wanna-
I would take a 6th round.
Maz,
I would take a 7th round pick from him.
If
not
he
to
don't
Philly.
want to be here, he doesn't want to be
Okay,
here.
then
Was
give me
it
a-
slavery? He
then
don't want
give
to
me
be
a
Matt,
here.
is this about Swift?
Exactly. Thank you, Dan.
I don't want the Eagles to have him.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Hey, Dan, Braylon was yelling at Maz yesterday about this very thing because he said exactly what you said.
the locker room.
locker room. He's like, we
Yeah.
don't want this guy in our room. Doesn't want to be here.
That locker room can be ugly when they see a guy not wanting to be there.
Yeah.
Like when they were 1-6, Dan tell me he wasn't on the field, he wasn't playing a lot, but then they start to win. Guys in the locker room are like, whoa, this guy wants to play now. What happened when we were 1-6? Like that's how guys in the locker room view things, man.
You would know.
Yeah.
No,
You would
and
think.
Braylon would know. And I think if his representatives were that quick to react, then you know where that's coming from as well. That's coming from the player. And I think it's probably just best for everybody involved. And you know what? Sometimes it's better to just make a break. Now, granted, they need to find probably a 3rd running back now, and whether it's the kid from Minnesota, Ibrahim, or Ibrahim.
You'll figure it out by August.
Yeah,
Muhammad Ibrahim.
who was, man, I loved him in college. He's fun to watch.
Of course.
Right. Craig Reynolds still
I
out there.
thought
I mean,
Justin
hell.
Jackson played an
Yes.
important role
I like
for this
JJ.
team last year, and he's still out there. So we'll see what happens. But point well taken. You've got to have some depth, and right now I think that's probably what they're working on.
The great
from
Dan
Georgia.
Miller, thanks so much for the
Thanks,
time, my
Dan.
friend. We held you over a lot longer than we told you.
Don't say we. It was
Aye,
Maz.
it was Maz,
It was
actually. Yeah, it
Maz.
was
It was
Maz's
Maz.
fault. Thanks, buddy. We appreciate you, and all the love to your cat as well for
I
making the
appreciate
appearance.
you guys. I'll circle back with you.
I appreciate it.
Very good.
Take care, Dan.
The great Dan Miller, everybody. Check him out on Fox 2 and, of course, Detroit Lions.